Hi everyone, thank you very much for stopping by and for returning to the old world. Today let's deal with the elephant in the room, the subject matter of a lot of online speculation, debate and argument. Will Games Workshop use Age of Sigmar models as part of the Warhammer The Old World range? Before we launch into that, I think it's important to note Games Workshop haven't said anything yet, certainly not that I've seen. So quite frankly, no one really knows the answer to this. It's not something that's worth getting annoyed about, angry about, but just for fun and a little bit of speculation, I thought we'll have a look at the arguments of both sides and some of my thoughts on this topic. So the people that are saying Age of Sigmar models will be distinct from Warhammer Old World models seem to be making three core arguments. These are that the Age of Sigmar models, they're just too big and too dynamic. They won't rank up properly. They'll be really difficult to use in a rank and flank game. Second argument is cost. These models, they're big, they're complicated, they're highly detailed. I mean, they look amazing, but a simpler model would allow Games Workshop to sell figures for less when it comes to Warhammer Old World, because you're going to need more models for your units. Therefore, they need to think about affordability and accessibility. Third argument is looking at other games that Games Workshop produce, particularly Horus Heresy, where you get units, models representing, I should say, units for Horus Heresy and 40k. So Tactical Marines, for example, you can get a 40k version, you can get a Horus Heresy version. It's not where you're expected to use the existing models for both games. So what's the arguments on the other side? Well, we can roughly pin them into the same sort of three categories. Age of Sigmar models can be made to rank up, and I've seen people's pictures online of, for example, the new Chaos Warriors from the Slaves to Darkness range ranked up now. They don't necessarily rank up brilliantly, but it does seem that it can be done. It's just going to be fiddly and a little bit on the challenging side. As for cost, well, the argument against two ranges is if you sell a simpler, cheaper version of a model, the people will just buy that. So rather than buying the new Chaos Warriors, the new Lizardman models, people would probably just buy the cheaper ones, because if it's going to sit in the middle of a big block of other figures, you're not going to see the difference. Why bother? And for Age of Sigmar, you might as well just take the budget option, and I think a lot of people would be tempted by that. So it would affect sales of the more expensive models. When it comes to Horus Heresy 40k, these games have very different aesthetics. And one of the things we've seen from the concept art for Warhammer Old World is actually the look of the game is probably going to be very similar to 6th, 7th, 8th edition models. We're not looking at completely different marks of armour as we see in the differences between Horus Heresy and 40k. So there's perhaps less of an argument around needing those two ranges. So that is really the two angles that we're seeing in relation to this. So what do I actually think? Well, I think scale creep is definitely a factor here. It's always been a thing. Models have got increasingly bigger, even though theoretically the model scales have stayed the same. By 8th edition, loads of models were an absolute pain to rank up. Certainly thinking of things like Dark Elves, anything with cloaks really, or arms are swinging around and things like that. The models were also getting a little bit chunkier, and it was getting more and more difficult to make a unit look decent ranked up, unless you were particularly skilled at this sort of thing. Which leads us into another argument, or debate, which I think underpins the Age of Sigmar question. And that is, base sizes. Now, we know that the scale, the theoretical scale, is going to remain unchanged. We know that Games Workshop wants us to be able to use our old armies. We know that they're going to be on square bases. They've said all of this. What they haven't said is the base sizes will remain unchanged. And there does seem to be a growing speculation around the idea that base sizes is going to increase. So your typical human-sized model, dwarf, goblin, stuff like that, would move from a 20mm square base to a 25mm, with your larger infantry, for example, move Chaos Warriors, let's take, or Lizard, the Saurus, Orcs, moving from 25mm square bases to something like 30mm. And this would, if it happens, perhaps remove some of the challenges around using the newer, more dynamic models from Age of Sigmar, because they'll have that little bit more room to base up. I have seen quite a, let's say, reactionary comment when it comes to talking about this topic, and saying increasing the size of the bases would ruin the game. Personally, I think that takes it a little bit too far. It would definitely have an impact, and it might be that we'd need to go from typically units having 5 models in a rank to 4 models in a rank for, well, certainly for infantry, in order to have similar numbers of units on the table. But it may, of course, be that Games Workshop go in a different angle. Who knows? There's so many unknowns in here. It's a little bit ridiculous. Now, if there is a change in base sizes, or even actually now, even if there isn't, I think it would be really, really good if Games Workshop came out in one of its monthly-ish updates pretty soon to say this is what base sizes will be. There's clearly a lot of interest in this topic, and I know loads and loads of people out there, they're refreshing old armies, they're collecting new ones, they want to be able to play Warhammer on day one. What they don't want to have to do is then fiddle around either rebasing or finding a way of making old bases fit new scales, new sizes. And it's something I think Games Workshop can knock on the head pretty early on and just let us get on with looking forward to the game and getting ready for that release date, whenever that may be. Of course, there is another solution to all of this, which is looking at perhaps a more Kings of War style basing. And this, it might even be a better change, to be honest, because it doesn't matter about the individual models, what bases they're on. What matters is the footprint of the unit as a whole. And we don't have to faff about with individual models and taking them away and having unit fillers that we then need to take that off and subtract how many of things are dead and put X number of individual models back and all that sort of stuff. It would probably clean the game up to a certain extent. However, one thing we do know from Games Workshop is they've said that the new rules will be based very heavily on what was good about previous editions. And there hasn't been an edition, to my knowledge, where there was a unit footprint and that mattered rather than the individual models. So whilst it might be a nice development, whilst it might make our lives quite a bit easier for working out what we want to do, and even for allowing us to use armies that we'd perhaps originally thought about using for other rule sets and then bringing them back into the fold, I don't see any of that happening, if I'm entirely honest. So there we go. Really, perhaps you can bring my thoughts together to say, when it comes to the argument around Age of Sigmar models versus Warhammer Old World models and having 2 ranges for the same models, I think the answer probably lies in base sizes, and that will determine what people want to do with their models and will have a big impact on whether the new Age of Sigmar models, the larger, more dynamic, more expensive figures, are what get realistically taken forward for Warhammer, the old world. So that's it from me for today. Fully appreciate, I know as much as probably 99.9% of everyone else out there, if not more, which is nothing, pure speculation. But as I said at the head of the video, I think interesting speculation, and we can have a little bit of fun talking about our relative theories. This is Return to the Old World. Have a great day.